Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the February 6th regular Board of Education meeting. Can we have a roll call, please?
Here.
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 Here, thank you. Okay, the first item on the agenda is written communication. Dr. Davis, do we have any written communication?
We have no written communication this evening.
Okay, great. The next item on the agenda is items for information, and we're starting with the Popular Annual Finance Report Award
All right.
for 2022.
Kendra Williams is coming with a what we refer to as the PAFR, and with some good news.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
I must say, this is really bizarre for me because I'm not accustomed to going first whenever I present, and so, and just a fair warning that I am actually going to be starting us off today, but I also have some other items on the tail end of this, so. We know. Yes.
Just make sure that we're awake by the time we get to that.
I can't speak for what happens in the middle of all the good news that's going to be shared tonight.
That's on us.
So as Dr. Campbell mentioned, we're going to be going over the Popular Annual Financial Report, just an overview of it. It's also known as the ETHS Digest. And so we completed that. And it's basically a document that has various articles in there. Some would have financial information, others, articles that are in the document give snapshots of ETHS and the wonderful things that are happening in the district, in the school, with our students and everything else. And so it really talks about the government, like the operations here. And it's an easy way for stakeholders to be able to take the information in an easy to digest way, because it really is like a higher level, even more so than like our annual comprehensive financial report, which I will be going over that later in the evening. And so just some of the things that are included in there, it'll have enrollment numbers, the district goals, budget information, revenue expense highlights from the fiscal year, and then also highlights of events and awards from the previous year. And so this is for fiscal year 2022, so that's a 21-22 year, where we adopted a balanced budget for the 15th consecutive year. And then also on the page that is the budget overview, we just went over some financial threats as well, just to, make the reader aware of different things that we're facing when we're trying to budget conservatively and make sure that we keep the district in the best position possible. Some of the challenges that we face, whether it be related to the current state of affairs with the state's economy or different things as it relates to inflation or COVID-19 and the effects of the pandemic that we've had to face. So those things are in there. And then we also have different charts and graphs as well. This one just breaking down the operating fund revenues by category. And then also speaking of revenues, so we also have an article in there that's titled, "Where Does the Money Come From?" And it gives details about the different large sources of revenue. And right here in this graph, we have some items for comparison for 2020, fiscal year 2022 versus 2021. So it'll show the comparison between years of our largest sources of revenue. And so that's also in the document for people to be able to have a visual representation in addition to the words that are there laying out what we budgeted and what we received. And then this one is the opposite of it, right? Where does the money go? Speaking on expenditures, and then being able to just see where those sources were for our expenditures. And then there are some additional articles, as I mentioned. It's not just all about the finances, but some of the great things that are happening around the building, such as geometry in construction, which got an award last fiscal year and was recognized by SEPA. our partner in geometry and construction. Also talks about edible acres and how it's helping to feed not only those in the district, but also the community as well. There was a wonderful article highlighting our new superintendent, Dr. Campbell, and then also one on an equity empowerment organization and talking about the beginning of Camp Kumba. And also, of course, ETHS being ranked up. I think I went from bottom to top. I don't know how that happened. And I'm not even tired yet. So ETHS being ranked among top high schools in the nation. So lots of great things happening. Excellence awards for financial reporting as well that were received by the district. Those are highlighted in our popular annual financial report. And distribution. So the report can be found, it's posted on our website under the business services page. And then also we've ordered copies that will be, like if anybody wanted a copy, they'll be in the business office very soon. And speaking of awards, we do apply to GFOA for an award for our popular annual financial report. And we were honored to be awarded for our FY 2021 report. We did receive the award in recognition, and so just wanted to bring that up and highlight it as well. So highlight that as well, that we were able to receive that award. And so it's just a big shout out always to the business office team as a whole for the hard work that they do every day to make sure that we're able to stay in a good position and be recognized for the hard work. All right.
Thank you, Kim.
Thank you. Yeah,
Thank you.
so,
All right.
I just want to say that I know these awards they come so frequently that we kind of think, oh, yeah, another award. These are amazing. So really, we appreciate it. And we don't want to go too quickly over these awards. So congratulations.
Thank you.
To you and to your team.
Thank you.
Because I know that it takes a lot of work. And I love this report. You know I love this report. This is like one of my favorite reports because it gives so much information and it's beautifully done.
Agreed.
It's I would encourage, I know that a lot of people are watching. I know. I would encourage folks to either get a hard copy or really go through the electronic copy.
Yes.
Because it's really great.
Yes.
It's great. It's an unusual show of how we spend our money.
Yeah, I definitely enjoyed as well because I think that it does a really good job of mirroring, like I said, not just the finance pieces, which I find very interesting, but also taking a fuller look and taking in the full story of ETHS and putting all that together. So.
All right, thank you. Thank you. We'll see you later. All right, the next item is the AP African American Studies course. And, Dr.
All right,
Hill?
dear board, we're going to have Dr. Kamasi Hill, longtime ETHS teacher, veteran teacher, who has been very involved with the development of the AP African American Studies course. As a matter of fact, if you look in the packet, 234 pages, right at the beginning of the packet, you see Dr. Hill's name along with the list of other academics, the post-secondary.
But you also see Evanston Township High School.
Yes, you do.
Yes, that was great. Yes.
Dr. Hill and I worked really closely with the College Board last year to make sure that we were on the front end of this. Lots of back and forth, and he's going to set some context for the course, talk a little bit about the course, and answer any questions that you may have regarding what is fact and fiction. There's a lot in the press right now that's about this class. We are going to run the course. We're happy to do that, and but Dr. Hill is going to give us a little bit of the below the line, underneath the hood on how the course was developed, what the course is about, the objectives of the course, and answer some questions from the board. So, Dr. Hill, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Campbell, and good evening to all of the board members and Want to just say thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak here. This was not my plan at all. I thought I was just going to be teaching the course and helping develop the course. And then it looks like there was an entire political brouhaha that happened, and here I am. So I just want to say some things before I talk specifically about the details of the course. ETHS has had a long-term and a long-time relationship with the College Board. If you're not familiar, in the 1950s, ETHS was one of the pilot schools for AP European History in the latter part of the 1950s. And I'm fortunate enough to be one of the AP Euro teachers here, also at ETHS. So there is precedent for ETHS to be on the cutting edge on pilot courses and have a very healthy and solid relationship with the College Board. And I'm excited. I really am excited about the AP African American Studies course. We have had 8 students this year in the first year of the pilot, and as of right now, we have, I don't know the numbers, but there's going to be several students and maybe even multiple courses starting in the fall for AP African American Studies. I became a part of the developmental committee for the College Board a couple of years ago with the blessing of my supervisor, Ms. Parker, and Dr. Campbell. They allowed me some generous time to be away from the classroom for a couple of days and spend some time traveling with the College Board, having conversations with different professors, as well as members of the College Board leadership, helping to develop the course. And it has been a long, tedious process, and we were told early that there would be some controversy because African American Studies has historically been a course that has been a challenge just to be accepted as a part of colleges and universities, much less a high school. So I just want to kind of set up some context for that, because I think it's important to understand that there's a long history of making sure that the experiences of the descendants of Africa and the descendants of slaves, their story and their legacy has been told and taught in American curriculum. In 1835, Reverend Daniel Hale Williams had 3 students in Charleston, South Carolina. And he had to go underground because of what happened in 1831, and that was something that happened down the road in Northampton, which was the Nat Turner Rebellion. And so you're talking about a state that actually passed a law in 1835 to say it was illegal to teach African Americans how to read and write. So that particular situation is the start of public education, because what Daniel Hale Williams did is 20 years later, he started Wilberforce University. You had, in 1903, W.E.B. Du Bois, the first African American to receive a PhD from Harvard University, create the entire field of sociology, which introduced the study of race in the United States of America on the formal level, on the college level. And then you had, about a decade later, Carter G. Woodson, who's the founder of Negro History Week, eventually became known as Black History Month, who was the second black man to get a PhD from Harvard, to create a series of curriculum and journals that detail the long history of African Americans. And then here in Evanston alone, you had a debate between 2 professors, one whose name is all over buildings at Northwestern University, and that's Melville Herskovits, who was a sociologist who understood that the history of African Americans was a history in where African Americans retained various cultural traits from Africa. And for 40 years, him and E. Franklin Frazier debated, and many of those debates took place right here. And his work is a huge part that has influenced the study of African Americans and this particular course. And then, of course, you have the battles and struggles here at Evanston Township High School, just to develop a course where black students and brown students and white students and Asian students can learn about the contributions of African Americans, with the famous sit-in that happened in 1969, led by the late Hecky Powell, to get a Black Studies course here at Evanston Township High School. So some of those struggles helped to...
Dr. Hill, that's really good. Can I just say, that's just really good stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important for us to understand, like, this course has a long history. And I just want to bring up a couple other points because I don't want to forget the role and contribution of black women. Black women with the Combahee River Collective were so instrumental in the 1970s to challenge men and to challenge curriculums, to challenge universities, to include the story of black women. And then, of course, in the 1990s, we had the creation of African-centered schools and African-centered curriculums, led by Hakeem Adabuti, a great Chicagoan, who created over 60 independent African-American schools here in the United States. So when we come to this particular issue with the College Board, in 2023, and Governor DeSantis and other state legislatures who object to the teaching of African-American studies, it's just another chapter of the long struggle to include the voices, the stories, the experiences, and to make the history and the culture of African Americans valid and visible for the larger culture to see, learn, and experience. And I'm so happy that Evanston Township High School and the leadership here at Evanston Township High School is supportive of one additional chapter, which is the AP African American Studies course that the College Board has presented. And I'm glad to be a part of that experience. I'm glad to be a part of helping to develop the course and bring it forth. And I'm glad to be on the front line, continuing to fight the good battle to make sure that our students learn about the contributions of all people, but in particular, the contributions of African Americans. I can tell you that the curriculum is 234 pages. I can tell you that it's 4 units, that we start all the way in 15th century Benin, and we make the long trek through the Middle Passage. We discuss the history and role of the dispersal of African people throughout South America, the Caribbean, and North America. We highlight the fusion of African cultures plural, and the new identity of this emerging new people called African Americans. And we trace the experiences, the struggles, the love, the fights, the joys of African Americans, their institutions, their families, their contributions, their inventions, all the way up through the 21st century. So in 150 days, Evanston Township High School students and 59 others this year have been learning about the experience of African Americans in an accelerated pace, and we as the developmental committee and those on the leadership of the College Board are going to be introducing 550 more schools to the curriculum next year. We'll be in a soft pilot, and then in 2024, the course will open up nationwide and worldwide. So that's where we are, and I'm glad to get the support of you, and I'll entertain any questions that you have.
Wow. Thank you so much. Thank you for giving us that history. Thank you for including ETHS and Evanston in that history and just putting it all in perspective. I did have a chance to go through some of the 234 pages. I have to admit, it's a lot but extremely impressive. And as Dr. Campbell pointed out at the very beginning, to see the names of the developers and where they're all from. Most of them are higher ed people.
Yes.
And then to see ETHS, I just felt really blessed that you are here, you're part of our community, that you're leading this work here. I felt like we do have an advantage here. And I know that you have a team, and there are teachers working with you, but I just feel like we have such an advantage having you. So thank you so much, and thank you for so eloquently just laying out that history. This is where we are, and so we're looking at another chapter.
Yes.
So anyway, I'll open it up to my colleagues. Pat?
Well, thank you. And Marcus commented that you approached it from a history, because you're a history teacher. And you made the first point that I was thinking when I read the framework, which is that we all need to know our entire history, because we're destined to repeat the mistakes if we don't understand the backstory. And so as I read that framework and saw the levels of depth into African history and the connections to all these, you did a wonderful job. And so thank you for doing that. I know that's a lot of work. We were joking, it was long to read, but it was way more time to develop. So thank you for doing such a thorough job. And I need to say, as a person who majored in history, and my focus was North American and US, didn't learn most of what's in that framework.
Yeah.
I taught high school in Chicago in the 90s. None of our books talked about that. I brought in some of my own stuff to try to supplement in a completely imperfect way, because I hadn't been taught a lot of it. And the resources weren't there, certainly from the district. And then I have a 22-year-old who just graduated from a very, very good college, majored in history also, couldn't get the the depth of African American history, so she had to minor in African American studies in order to get a complete history. That was in 2022. So I'm on a bit of a soapbox, Marcus knows I have a few. And this really, to me, is the finally making an inroad into teaching our whole history. And so I really applaud you for all the work you've done and the beautiful work that you've done with others from the College Board. And when the whole thing blew up, in the last week or whatever with DeSantis's comments, and then the College Board making changes or saying some things publicly, really was difficult to take, because there's nothing in there that all students, my kids, your kids, everybody's kids should be learning this, right? So a couple of questions that I wanted to ask. So one is the process, because one of the items in the at the beginning of Unit 4, it talks about diversity within the Black communities. And so to me, one of those diversities would be the Black conservative thinking, but that's been raised up as now it's been added. Again, I don't know if it's really been added or they're just talking about it. But so can you tell us about the process? Were there divergent perspectives? Was there debate? How did that piece work?
When you bring academics into a room, there's always going to be debate. There's always going to be debate. First, let me say this. I just want to correct the record, because there's a lot of information in the media that's not necessarily 100% accurate. So there's the framework, which is the public source that you all have. And the vast majority of all frameworks within the AP history courses are primary sources. So the AP courses preference primary sources because, number one, they're easier to get permission for, because a lot of them are, public use. And number two, they really wanted the students to be able to, they really want to be able to create uniformity in all of the courses under the history rubric. So some of the sources that have been removed from the framework are actually optional and secondary sources for the students to be able to use and the teachers to be able to use.
Okay.
Secondly, the question about diversity within the Black community and the conservative element, there's historically always been a conservative element in the Black community. Whether it is Booker T. Washington, who's a part of the curriculum, whether it's certain African-American churches, which are a part of the curriculum, which is Zora Neale Hurston. I mean, there's so many, conservative, and diversity within the conservative voices themselves, right? That are a part of the curriculum. So the Unit 4 is where a lot of people have some objections because some things were moved around. Like I said, some things were moved around from primary to secondary, and then some things were added just to kind of flesh things out a little bit more. So I want to just make that statement known, because there's a lot of information that people are getting that's not 100% accurate. There's also, I think, the other component, and it's that happened last week that was challenging for many of us who've been a part of this process for the past year and a half. There's the DeSantis component, right, where we have certain politicians who have problems with the curriculum. There's also been a very vocal critique from certain African-American studies professors who were disappointed in some of the changes to the curriculum. And some of them just didn't have the right information, and some of them had some legitimate critiques as well because of some communication issues. And so that was also a big challenge in trying to make sure that they're on board. And the last thing I want to say is this is a high school course that teaches college level material.
Right.
It is not a African American studies course that you would take at a university class. And one of the big reasons why is because the vast majority of college professors don't emphasize the teaching of skills. They assume that you know when you come into the class. Mm-hmm. 1/3 of the curriculum, I'm teaching students to understand how to interrogate sources.
Right.
We have source analysis. I'm teaching them how to identify the difference between primary and secondary sources. I'm teaching them how to write thesis statements and and develop research skills. Like, this is a part of the curriculum, which in addition to the other pages that they have to learn. So.
Right.
So it's a full curriculum for high school students, but it gives them access to college level work.
Right. And just to follow up on thank you for explaining the process and that there was debate. But how were the decisions made? Like, how did you make the decision to include what you did and to even choose certain sources? How did that work? Was that a democratic process, or how did that work?
So there are different committees. And the committee that I was on, we looked at the second unit. So I can only speak intelligently about what happened in the meetings for the second unit. And the second unit, for those of you who haven't seen the curriculum, is essentially the unit on slavery and resistance, and the Middle Passage and some other areas. But that's the unit I worked on. And it literally was a series of meetings talking about what are the things that what are the material and components that are in a traditional African American studies course at a college level. We looked at various syllabi. We talked to different professors, and we also looked at some of the major historical moments, as well as, because it's a studies course and not simply a history course, we looked at some of the other various components that go into developing a studies course: food, fashion, sociology, performance studies, music, all of these art, all of these things that are part of that. And we just wanted to make sure that that unit was consistent with what's being taught on the college level, as well as some of the more cutting edge primary source material that is important for students to learn, to get the full picture of what's happening during that time period. So that's how we decided. And and there was some debate, there was some cutting of sources, there was some, struggle. My contribution was based on my own research. I wanted to make sure that Black religion and the African American church was very present, which it is. It didn't get cut. And African American art. which is another one of my personal joys and loves, and that didn't get cut either. So I could say that my contributions are definitely in Unit 2. What happened in other meetings and other units, I'm sure was a similar process.
Right.
I'm not sure all of the details of what was happening, specifically in Unit 4, because that's really where, most people are having an issue with.
Right. Well, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Can I just
Sure.
add something
Oh, go
really
ahead.
quick? Oh, sorry. Super quick. From the student voice, I just like to thank you so much. It makes me so excited to see that you're so excited to teach this course. One of my best friends, she emailed you, and she was so elated after she heard back from you, and she's like, "Oh my God, I'm gonna put this on my course request form," and she was so excited, and she got me excited, so then I put it on my course request form, and I don't. It's just great. I'm so excited to see for what the future has to offer at
That's
ETHS, and I just pulled up the large file of 200 pages, and your name is on it.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm glad you went before me. I was going to say, my son loved you before you did this. But I hope our community and our students understand how historical this is. And I was trying to figure out how can I take the course. But to really listen to you, I know you're an exceptional instructor and teacher and educator anyway, but to be a part of this is so historical. So we become a dot on that, right, on that history timeline that you just articulated. And I hope our students understand this, and I hope our community understands that if we can produce someone, and we didn't produce you, but allow you to be a part of something like this, there are things in our community that we also are trying to face and overcome. And if we can do this and be a part of this and stand strong behind this, even in the midst of all that stuff that continues, we can do anything. And this is just a testament of how strong and how bold ETHS is.
Yes.
Right? And so I'm just proud of this, and I'm excited that students will get to experience this and be able to tell about it. So my hope and desire is that we don't bend, and that we stand strong behind this. And we, of course, we're not Florida, so we're Evanston. And we continue to support this, and that this is just amazing. Congratulations. We heard about this coming, before. We had no idea, I think, the magnitude in which it would be and produce. I have a question though. Do our students get to, our freshmen and our sophomore, do they get to sign up for courses by Dr. Hill? Or do you have to wait until you're a senior and junior?
So,
Yeah, go ahead, come on.
So the AP African American Studies course is open to juniors and seniors.
Okay,
It is, there are courses, I teach primarily senior electives. The current History of African American Studies course that I teach is open to juniors and seniors. So I typically don't see students until they become upperclassmen.
You haven't taught sophomores in a long time.
I haven't taught sophomores since my first year here. So yeah, it was 17 years. Yeah, so I haven't taught 16 years ago.
haven't.
Yeah. So I
okay,
haven't
so I guess my true question is, does this type of course study happen for our students at an earlier grade? Or does it exist just as a junior and senior?
At this depth, no. At this depth, it's junior and senior.
At this depth?
At this depth.
Do
But it
they
is,
get-
there are elements in our humanities curriculum for sure, and there's definitely some civics in our civics class. But we don't have it to the level we do for juniors and seniors. And there's no standalone
Do you
course
want
for
to hear
for
about it?
freshmen and sophomores.
Well, there's always been a concern that it's not deep enough at the younger grades, right? That we go deeper in certain incidents, and I know it's part of humanities and it's even part of, history or whatever, but we hit it quickly and then we're gone. There's no intense level of this study for the younger grades. So just something to think about. I mean, I know how my son didn't get to you until his senior year. And by then, I mean, when he experienced not just you teaching this, but the lesson and the opportunity and the history, it was impactful. He will never forget this experience as a person. And I just think that our students should experience this early, some form of this earlier on as well.
So I will say that in some school districts around the country, some school districts have decided to allow sophomores to take the course. As an educator, I have no problem with that. And I'd be supportive of students taking that as early as sophomore year. Just know that it's challenging. It's college material and a college level material. And so I'm here, I would be 100, for me as an educator, I'm 100% there to support students who are, 15 years old as sophomores who would be willing to take this course and be open to the rigor of a college course, at that age group. So I'm open to it, but I'm just the teacher.
And maybe it's not this AP, but how do we go deeper in the substance of the opportunities we have for freshmen and seniors in humanities and so forth, so that they are exposed to it earlier on and, and they get more excited about this or get an opportunity to experience this in their junior or senior year. Thank you.
I mean, that would actually help them build up and be ready. Because what we want is we want our students, when they're freshmen and sophomores, to, to get excited, right, about AP courses and do what they need to do to be ready to take the AP courses, and that would be a way for that to happen.
Kind of like a gateway to AP courses, Dr. Babels?
There it is.
Yeah, what an idea, right? Gretchen?
Thanks so much. I especially like the sort of context, the proximate context that you gave us at the beginning as well. Other people have already commented on that. So I have one comment and then I have one question. The comment is, I think the other thing that I've heard in the news, and it became apparent in looking through this very long document, that the course does not dwell exclusively on the kind of dark history, the sad, the horrible history, the slavery, all of that stuff in the beginning. It lifts up the good news and the strength in the African American community, the heroes in the community, the depth and breadth of the talents and things on offer. And I think that comes through in this curriculum and is one of the critical reasons why our students need to be exposed to this, so that we're not, it has always seemed to me that we do, American history over and over again, starting in elementary school, middle school, and high school, and we do the Civil War a million times. I mean, just really sort of ad nauseum, and can't ever sort of get past it or go deeper. So that was encouraging to me. And then, sort of the question piece relates to some of the recent controversy, and that is this notion that DeSantis raised. I hesitate to even bring it up. He's certainly not our governor. That intersectionality or queer theory or any of those things are somehow inappropriate for our students to learn about. And I just want to be clear from you and in my review of this, the curriculum doesn't seem to have lost sight of those as important subjects of discussion. At the very end of the document, I'm on page 226, it's in the project section. Believe me, I didn't read word for word. But towards the end, when they talk about societal examinations for projects, there's reference there, for example, to intersectionality and the dimensionality of the dimensions of Black experiences, the complexities of Afrocentricity and Black nationalism, gay life and expression in Black communities. So I just want to make crystal clear for anybody who thinks that our students won't get exposure to some of these complicated topics, that is not foreclosed to them in the course that we are teaching here at ETHS. And I guess I just...
Yeah, and not only is it not foreclosed, the unique thing about this course that's different from any other AP course, with the exception of one or two other courses that actually have a capstone project, is that this course is not solely rely upon the end of the year exam that College Board typically gives these courses. 20% of the course for their that is included in their final AP exam is a project where the students can write an essay on anything in the curriculum that they, or some derivation of the curriculum that they choose, which includes some of the things that you mentioned, including queer history, queer theory, intersectionality, Black Lives Matter, like all of the things that have been talked about and bound around has been excluded. The students have complete access to not only studying it, learning it, but writing about it. And that project is 12, the students have to write 1,200 to 1,500 words. They get about 3 weeks, they get, 6 weeks total, but 3 weeks of intensive writing and research. And then we're just here to facilitate that. The teachers are just here to facilitate that. So this year, the students will come up with their topics before we go to spring break. And then they'll spend a large part of April working on their projects, and then they'll turn it in by May 1st. And they can choose any topic that is in the framework or some type of derivation from that, which includes some of the things that have been, bantered around in the news as being excluded. No, they have complete access to that.
Right. Well, I'll just echo what others have said, which it sounds like a really amazing course. It was certainly nothing I was ever exposed to during my high school career. And just more personally, I'll say, my husband grew up in Tulsa, and the Tulsa Race Massacre, which he has mentioned over and over and over again in recent years, because we've both read, there's been a recent book and sort of an older book on the subject, was never, not only was it not taught, it wasn't even mentioned. And he spent his entire life growing up from almost birth through high school. Never ever came up. I think the first time he'd heard about it may have been an exhibit at the Smithsonian. Now has a display on it, and a few other places, and some recent books. So, I think it's important not just for African American students, but for students of all races here at ETHS. So, thanks so much.
Hi, I just want to say thank you so much for this presentation, for situating Evanston in your introduction, and for all of us, and for being on the front line and representing us so well. I just kind of wanted to spring off of what Gretchen mentioned. It makes me think, I didn't, and Pat as well, as a white student, going to high school in the 80s, I didn't learn history this way. I went to a liberal arts college on the East Coast, and also I went to a women's college. And, as an American Studies major, somehow managed to complete my major without much attention on this. And so I feel a sense of deprivation and theft of that knowledge, and I think that that makes me very sad, and I'm also very joyful that we are able to do it differently now in this place, in this time, to be able to give our students these opportunities. I think I was so outraged last week, I guess I got caught up in the media, sort of discussion about, the College Board making changes or sort of conceding to political pressure. And I'm glad to hear that's, been sort of overstated or overblown or misrepresented. On the other hand, I do worry about the theft, and I do worry about the threat of, the things all around us. I think it's very easy in places like Evanston to feel like we're safe because we have, people in our community who are ensuring that this is preserved and protected and made available to our students. But I wonder, just as you see on the front line, as a frontline fighter in this struggle, do you see that there's a threat? Do you see that, what should we be alert to? What should we be mindful of as we sort of sit here in our very unusual, unique community?
So I have the, I don't know if fortunate is the best word, but I have an interesting vantage point. When I was 5 years old, my father took me to, my father was, at the time when I was 5, he was starting his doctoral work at University of Michigan. And he was an adjunct teacher in the Black Studies Department at Eastern Michigan University. So this is, I was 5, so this was I'm aging myself. This is 1978. I remember being 5 years old, going to the Black Studies Department at Eastern Michigan University. I didn't know what a department was. I just thought it was a room because that's all they had. It was a room, books and a typewriter, and 2 people. It was my father and another professor. And I learned as I started to grow older that was a fight to get that room because they were just going to allow them to teach adjunct, be adjunct to teach these Black Studies courses. So for me, I've always been adjacent in some way, form, or fashion to these types of fights. And so a part of me, when this happened last week, I was like, oh, this is just another fight. And that's why I wanted to contextualize it in my opening remarks. It's always been a fight. When you are trying to tell the story, particularly tell the story of resistance and struggle and love and joy and hope and all that stuff from a people who have been historically excluded from not just college curriculums, but high school. Many of you have said, I didn't learn this stuff in college, which meant you definitely didn't learn it in high school, right? So it's always been a part of my story. So for me as an individual, I'm very, very well aware of, the noise. And I've just kind of learned to position myself in a way to always be ready. And that is one of the reasons why I'm very happy to work here at Evanston Township High School, because at least I don't get the noise from here. You see what I'm saying? So I can continue the fight, without feeling stressed at my day job, So it's always going to be a fight. It always will be. And when I say always will be, that doesn't mean I don't have any hope that it will never be changed. But I started the conversation talking about 1835. I can go back further, but it's always been this fight. And so, and it's not just DeSantis. He's running for president. That's why we, but it's others as well. So.
Hi, I'll just add a couple comments. And I'm looking at notes from a conference I went to where Dr. Yaba Blay, who will be here,
Yes.
talked about, we've had the same alarm ringing since 1619. and you've been hitting the snooze button. And right now, we're not in this work. And so I keep thinking about that combined with Dr. Eddie Glaude when he said that America is the baby and white supremacy is the umbilical cord, and we are the midwives. And I see you in that role as well as the midwife, and how we can support our babies and this curriculum. And so I thank you for that. And I think about then the course itself being this pivot to white supremacy, to all the kids being in the space to learn when did whiteness become something that could be purchased, and how do we begin to really separate from that as a people, all of us. And so I am quite in awe and want to be a part in any way, as I sit here, in support of this. So, thank you.
And I'll just, if no one else has anything, I just want to close out by saying there's a phrase that I often teach my students in my African American history courses, and that's a Latin phrase called sui generis, and it just means of their own kind, of on their own. And the reason why that I teach my students that is because I want them to understand that African American history and the studies of African American people are not connected to simply doom and gloom and oppression, right? That there's a uniqueness of the African American experience, and of course there's a particularity about the African American experience. But the beauty of it is that so much of what this curriculum supports is that sui generis, that spirit of sui generis. It's of their own. It's about the contributions. It's about the love. It's about the joy. It's about the hopes. It is a curriculum that spans, several centuries, that really roots and grounds the studies from the scholarship, from the communities that are being studied, that are being focused on. So a lot of the professors that may have objected to some of the material, there are at least 300 scholars, living scholars, who are represented in this curriculum. So African American scholars that are represented in this curriculum, and I think that's such an important thing to name and bring forth. And I'm appreciative of all of your support, and I look forward to AP African American Studies being taught here and other schools in the North Shore as well.
I think Liz had a comment as well.
Yeah, I had a comment and a question. First, thank you for that beautiful sentiment you just gave us, and thank you so much for all of your involvement in this development of this curriculum. I just think it's such a privilege that our students have access to this curriculum. I'm going to be talking to my kids about it tonight or tomorrow, even though they're very young, but I'm going to tell them about this and how important it is that they take advantage of it. Earlier you had mentioned something about there was kind of a primary part of the curriculum and a secondary part.
Yeah, so there are sources that the students are introduced to that are in the pilot that you have, the 234-page pilot. Those sources are primary source references that the students are learning from in the curriculum that are being taught, that are a part of the essential lessons in the curriculum. The secondary sources are historical documents that are added as an addendum that can be introduced, that are going to be introduced to students, that'll be available to students, not in the curriculum, but in an area on the College Board website called AP Classroom. So AP Classroom is a part of the College Board program, but it's where students can go to get additional supplemental information and sources. And there's also another component of the College Board course is called AP Daily, where you have teachers who are teaching the course and experts in the field of African American studies who will be doing videos for students to be able to learn from as well. So the students have access to the curriculum, they have access to the supplementary material, and they have access to college professors who are teaching African American studies who are going to be doing videos to help them reinforce the skills that are being taught in the classroom, as well as being prepared for the project and the AP exam. So the students will have a wide range of sources that they can choose from.
So for the supplemental material, is that something that's kind of up to the discretion of the teacher as to what they're going to be presenting?
Yeah, so the teachers can introduce it, but it's not a part of the primary sources that they are required to teach and use. So I'll be introducing supplementary materials. I may say, hey, we're going to do, a couple of questions, or we're going to write a paragraph. And here's the primary document that you need to know, and here's some supplementary materials that can aid you in the process of learning. So I can introduce those materials, and the students can have access to it. It's not hidden from them. They'll have access to it right on the website, and teachers could use it as well in the classroom. It's just not a required component of the curriculum because the students won't be tested on it for the AP exam in May.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, so once again, thank you so much. Thank you for being who you are, and thank you for the time that you spent to teach us. You just taught us a lot tonight, so. Yeah, we all want to take the course, so don't be surprised if you see us.
Sure, you're more than welcome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, see, they're plotting. I think I'd enjoy that project, too. 6 weeks of writing. Okay. Back to the agenda. The next item on the agenda is international travel for 23-24.
Yeah, so Robbie Brown's coming to see if you have any questions about international travel. I just want to officially say that international travel is back. We suspended international travel in the spring of 2020 and have not brought this to the board in 2 years, or 3 years. And so here we are, as you can see in your packets, we've got a lot of trips. So Robbie Brown is here to see if you have any questions about any of those opportunities.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you, board members and ETHS staff members, for hosting me here tonight to present the international travel for the 23-24 school year for your consideration. Like Dr. Campbell just said, I last sat in this seat to present this back in February of 2020, so it's really exciting to be back and speaking on behalf of several of our programs and classes and teachers and staff members here for international travel trips. If you've been at ETHS a while, you'll recognize that a lot of the trips that are being presented are familiar to everyone. A lot of them are based around our world languages classes, and they are very excited to be returning to traveling for some like capstone or project-based learning for their students that are able to go and selected to go. We do have one new one through our science department that I'm really excited about this year. It's a trip to Belize for conservation from ridge to reef. Dr. Isaacs in our science department, along with Ms. Ottman and Mr. Reimer, are sponsoring that one. So that is a new one that we're really excited about putting forth for your consideration. As you do consider things, there's some 4 points that I would like you to keep in mind as you're considering these trips. First of all of our staff are expected and really do a great job of ensuring equity in the students that are selected to attend, whether that's based on gender and race or economic status. All of our staff that sponsor these trips really do a great job if there's a limited number of spots on making sure that it is a cross-section representative of ETHS that does attend the trips. Next, I want you to know that the safety of students is also at the forefront of everybody's minds, both physical and social emotional well-being. We're constantly monitoring events that are happening in other countries that we're traveling to, and also U.S. State Department advisories as the trips are coming near. And in the past, we have had to make some adjustments based on events that have happened in other countries, so we're well aware of that, and that all of that is taken into consideration as well. Next up, excuse me, sorry about that. Next up, financial situation is also very much taken into consideration. So when staff members advertise these trips, they advertise them to students saying, don't let the cost be a factor to determine whether you want to apply to go on this trip or not. So through a combination of fundraisers and scholarships and donations, cost is not a determining factor for any student to attend any of these trips. We figure it out if the student does qualify to go. And finally, the academic situation. You'll see that some of the trips do happen during the regular school year, and that's for reasons that are listed in the memorandum that you received. But if they are taking place during school, please know that the staff members work with students to get work way ahead of time. They encourage schoolwork to be done during the travel time. They form study groups while they're on the trips, and they make sure they're staying in touch with their teachers back here at ETHS while they're on these trips as well. So, you know, a lot of the trips that happen during school during the school year are scheduled so that we take advantage of spring break or maybe another holiday or a non-attendance day at ETHS. And we also do that for availability of some exchange programs that we do can only host us at certain times during the school year, and to take advantage of off-season or off-peak pricing so that it's more affordable for students to attend and to make the trip the best that it can be for all the students. So those are the 4 things that I would like you to keep in mind as you read through and consider these. The information is all in the memorandum, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. And I apologize, my phone, I don't think you heard my phone, but my phone is connected to my hearing aid, so while I was talking, it started ringing in my ears through Bluetooth, so I apologize.
That's okay. Thank you. All right.
Bad timing on a phone call.
Questions, Mira?
Hi.
Hi.
Hello. So my question, and forgive me, because I can't open my board book for some reason, so maybe I saw this and missed it. So I have 2 questions. One is, what are we doing to accommodate students with different abilities? And I'm thinking physical, as well as, like you said, there was social, emotional, safety and well-being that we were thinking about, but that comes up for me when I think about accommodations. And then the second piece is, you mentioned fundraisers and various other ways to help our students. And so I'm thinking about that, and I'm wondering about the date. Do we collect and do you report back, and I just have missed this because I'm new, on who ends up going and how we look at the student demographics within each of these beautiful experiences, but very expensive and, you know.
Yeah.
Well, I'll take the second part. We don't report back. That's a report that hasn't come back to the board as to who went and the demographics of students that went. But when we consider these, as Robbie mentioned, Mr. Brown mentioned, we always consider the diversity of the school. If you want us to report back, we can certainly do that. And on the financial piece, we are sure that we would not want finances to be a barrier to any students. We have money specifically set aside for these kinds of trips for students. It comes out of the principal's office. I administered that fund for about a decade. So any student that really wants to go and is selected to go, we don't let finances be a barrier for them to attend. So, but if you want to report back who went and all of that, we can certainly do that at some point. Robbie, you can speak to the first question.
And the answer is very much the same, Dr. Campbell. Any student that wants to go and qualifies to go, we would make sure that we're doing everything we possibly can to meet the accommodations that are needed for students to be successful and have an enjoyable, in a lot of ways, once-in-a-lifetime trip that they'll always remember.
Any other questions? For me, the question regarding finances was important, and I saw that in the report, and you spoke to that, both of you spoke to that well, so I appreciate that. You know, even fundraising activities, that's a lot of fundraising for a lot of kids, but there's also other means and funds available, so thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question. Does the cost include what students need to, not just the traveling expenses or the accommodations, but, you know, if they need certain clothes or other things that they may need, going to Belize, you know, does it include that too, or is this just the cost of travel and accommodations and food?
This would be the cost of the trip for travel and accommodations, and if any food is provided as a part of it, the trip as well.
Or materials or things of that nature.
Yeah, so of that nature. Yeah, I just, you know, run a camp, happens to be Camp Echo, and, you know, there are kids who would love to go to Camp Echo, and we try to scholarship them, but then the barrier is the sleeping bag, the suitcase. So we're really talking about what Mira is mentioning, trying to be very intentional in the diversity. We have to understand that there are some students who have never traveled before, if we're talking about reflecting the community. So then that becomes even a barrier. We can get this amount covered, but does the family have what they need to get to this point? And that's what I mean. Like, is there, so they can't really fully engage in the conversation because they can't get out the door.
In past trips, they have accommodated for those needs. The overall cost of the trip has accommodated for those needs. And so that's been, I don't want to say baked in, but that's been included in the price.
Okay.
So I believe a little bit ago when the travel club was doing some things, they put all of that, the extra things that you're talking about, in the cost of the trip, so that the students didn't have to incur an additional burden for them to go.
Right, especially as we're thinking about coming out of the pandemic, and this is, and so this is.
And there are also some other funds available here at ETHS just to handle exactly what you're talking about, like smaller things that might not be a $2,000 scholarship to go on a trip, but if somebody needs the right attire for $79 or $150. There are some other funds available
or
here.
Glasses or all kinds
Or
of things.
passport.
Passport.
Well, yeah, I was just going to add, yeah.
All of that stuff can be included through funds here at the school. So that has, yeah.
You know, it's like you
Yeah, that could
get on
stop
the
somebody.
plane and get there, but if you can't, or, you know, if you can't get to the point, then that's a barrier. That's a barrier
For sure.
to diversifying this. So that's good. That's good to communicate and know.
Yeah, and I would be curious, you know, I don't want to create work, but if, because it is so central, as you said, the 4 things that we should keep in mind, and really 1 and, you know, 3 back up against each other, then I would love to see who ends up going and how we, if we are not able to see all of the barriers, because we obviously have the will to overcome them, because that's the intention that you just spoke of, then what might we do the second round when, you know, if we're finding that we're not able to capture the demographics of our school reflected in, you know, all of these trips. So I would like to know at the end which kids are going and how we're doing.
Or maybe which kids did not go that wanted to go, if that's the case.
Yeah, right. I mean, that's just right, like the flip side of the same coin, right? Yes. I think it would be great measurement of our success.
I guess I would just sort of say, you know, making things accessible is also making it easy for students to find out what they need and that this is available. Obviously, I mean, I'm sure, you know, a student may not know that they need a passport, or a student may not know that they need a certain amount of money for a passport, or for, you know, and how are they getting that information, and making sure that they're being invited to, that those, because it can be, I think it can be stigmatizing potentially, or, you know, difficult, especially if you don't know what you don't know.
Right.
So
when the sponsoring organization and/or teacher begins to talk about the trip, they cover all of those kinds of details. This is what the passport, this is how all of the mechanics we go over, not just with the students, but also with families. And these sponsors are pretty good about saying, don't let any barrier stop you from going, right? Because they will reach out to us and let us know, we got this kid in this situation, what can we do? We got that kid in this, what can we do? And we have always been able to work that out. Even when they have large groups of students going to Guatemala or wherever, we have just given a nice, you know, allocated a nice portion of funds so that it doesn't feel stigmatizing. So we're giving funds to the trip, not to just individual students, but to the trip, so that it takes away the stigma.
That's awesome.
Nice.
Great. All right.
Well, I appreciate you once again, and it's good to come back in front of the board for your consideration for these trips. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Robbie. All right. Okay, so now we are at item D, Literacy and Numeracy Report from Dr. Bavis. So there he is. This one I printed.
All right. Literacy and numeracy. This is directly related to District Goal 1 and will be directly related to our equitable and excellent education goal for years to come, because some of what we're going to talk about tonight has profound impacts long-term for our students and staff. Here's my 3-sentence synopsis. What was the impact of the pandemic on SAT achievement and incoming MAP achievement measures? Answer, reading achievement held steady, math achievement declined across subgroups. It's important because what we did was we used an ANOVA statistical test, and just briefly what that does is it compares group to group, so subgroup compared to subgroup, okay, very important, and then it looks at statistically if there's a difference in that distribution of scores, okay? And where we highlight significant changes, that's where we need to focus. Okay. It's not simply taking two numbers and subtracting one from the other, because if we do that, you do see a decline. Well, we were like looking at where's there really a statistical decline that we really need to focus in on in the future. We use standardized test scores to measure outcomes. It's efficient. Right, you can run statistical tests, they're large numbers. We actually looked at cohorts, graduate cohorts. That's how we grouped our students. We also looked at underneath graduate cohort by subgroup. That's how we did that. And we looked at all of our students in the cohort. We didn't isolate District 65 from private and parochial. We looked at all of them together. Okay, so what I want to just do as a caution is this isn't a report about District 65 data. This is a report about our data. Our incoming students all take the MAP test for placement purposes. So that's the data set we continually went back to. And then all of our juniors take the SAT in April. So those are our 2 markers for each cohort. And then finally, the caveat of, well, we want to see an increase in academic performance on these instruments. We also want students to reconnect with their classmates and teachers and to remember how to engage in learning at school. This is just looking and isolating academic achievement as measured on 2 standardized measures. So needless to say, our students and staff have experienced the largest disruption to learning in history, public school history for sure. When face-to-face teaching resumed, instruction last year was compromised by students or teachers having to quarantine and miss class. I used to get COVID alerts. I still do. I just don't get quite as few as I used to. Nowhere near. But at the beginning, when we returned a year ago in September, there were quite a few students who would have to quarantine, quite a few staff. So just wanted to point that out. Last school year was also disruptive. Relevant, knowing the impact of the pandemic, external measures informs our focus and clarifies instructional priorities and collaborations. It cautions us to examine short-term gains in light of cohort data, and it also helps us to predict future achievement. What you'll see is that during the pandemic, we really weren't able to do that. You saw a decline because there was a disruption. Post-pandemic, we want to look at what that achievement is coming out of the pandemic for our MAP scores for those cohorts, and how that's going to inform work at the high school. Reading, key takeaways for reading. Well, the good news is it held steady. It did not decline, and that's significant. But we don't know why. Is it the case of successful reading interventions, or is something else going on? We can't speculate. Part of me will speculate and say maybe reading achievement is baked in by the time students get to the high school. Another part is, maybe these findings, do they hold true at key developmental points? So for example, as we look at cohorts that come out and we say that they had 3rd grade was remote, or 4th grade, or 2nd grade, is that going to have a long-term impact on literacy? We don't know. We'll continue to monitor those cohorts as they come in. It's also important to note the differences in reading achievement across racial demographics continue. So, well, I said we were looking subgroup to subgroup, so white students pre-pandemic, white students post-pandemic, black students pre-pandemic. The gaps persist among those groups. So we didn't study that specifically in this, but those gaps do continue. And while reading hasn't grown, it hasn't declined. That's most important because we're concerned about, we thought it might be declining, right? Because when you look at the numbers and you do your quick addition back to the napkin, you say, oh, they're going down. But really there's been no significant change to the distribution of those scores. That's not what we see in the data. We see, in fact, that there isn't a change. But I'll be blunt. The pandemic did not change reading achievement, but it has had a significant impact on math in a very real way. It appears to be long-term, so I'm going to show you some charts that have color-coded for us. But since the pandemic, we've seen a steady decline, both in our SAT scores, but also if we look at our MAP scores for incoming freshmen post-pandemic, we see a decline there as well, a decline across cohorts and across demographic groups. With one exception, there was the one year where students took the MAP test remotely at home, and I won't speculate, but those are some pretty good scores. No, really, they were. There were some really good scores. But let's talk about some key takeaways in math.
I'm sure it's just because they could wear pajamas while taking the test.
That's probably, yeah. And have cookie breaks or whatever they needed. So math, when I started to dig into this, some things came up, right? I mean, one is that math is almost always formally learned at school. particularly when you start to get to like algebra and the kind of, geometry, pre-calculus, all that kind of stuff. So unlike reading, where there can be some, you can read books at home, you can practice at home. Practicing math at home doesn't occur nearly as much as it does in school. There's also this, in the literature, it talks about this potential broader stress and trauma related to the pandemic worsened existing math anxiety in some students. That's one speculation. But, I think it may also have been challenging for teachers to engage in effective math instructional practices via Zoom, since it was a traditional in-person experience for everyone, and it is sequential. I know this from visiting classes. Our math teachers have been addressing these gaps in instruction since students returned to in-person learning, and they continue to do so. Those gaps aren't linear. And by that I mean there's no one thing they're missing. It'd be one thing if we said, everybody missed exponents. We're going to double down on exponents and get everybody up to speed. But that's not what we see. The gaps have shown up, and I've witnessed these gaps in everything from one algebra all the way to multivariable calculus. And I don't get into I get into enough math classes, but I'm not in there every day, and my sample size is so small, and I see those across levels. So this is everything from freshmen who are striving algebra learners, they're taking algebra for a second time, all the way through our most advanced math classes. So those gaps and everything in between. And all different types of math gaps. So that our teachers are working, I would say, overtime to address these things in class. They're playing catch up. And they're playing catch up in a way where they don't know what the next day is gonna bring. It's significant. So here's some data charts, but what I wanna point out is the first chart you're looking at is a math chart. So in orange, everything you see in orange is pre-pandemic. So you have a column of math RIT scores. Those are students who took the math MAP test before the pandemic. And those are broken into grad cohorts. So like the class of 2023, they were in 8th grade, took the MAP way before the pandemic, and so on and so forth. You also see our control group for the SAT math is across the top, the 2020 grads. They actually took the SAT before the pandemic. And then you see in yellow highlighted with asterisks the corresponding significant decreases. And you see there's quite a bit of yellow. There's yellow for entire classes, so that's just changes in the distribution that signal that there's something going on beyond a normal variation. You'll see that, we see that with white students, we see that with Black African American students. Our Latino students, they're falling within the range of variability. They don't demonstrate that change, even though they did decrease. They're not within that statistical range. That has to do with cohort size and the variability of the test scores within that range. But this isn't a good sign, right? We see this as a challenge, and these are just sort of saying, here's what happened while the kids were at ETHS during the pandemic. Here's their math achievement. And we also have our IEP, and we also disaggregate by IEP and non-IEP. You do see that those numbers they've decreased, but the variability, the size of those cohorts is small, so that means the corresponding decrease has to be even larger for it to be, otherwise it's just variation in the size. Next, you see the reading scores. What do you notice with the reading scores? A lot of orange and no highlights. Now, does that mean that scores didn't decrease? Sure, here and there. But what it also means, though, is that they didn't decrease to the extent to which it's a different distribution. It's within that range of normal for that fluctuation. I also want to point out that, again, the orange represents kids who took the test in those cohorts before the pandemic, and everything that's not orange is after. See the same thing with our IEPs, non-IEPs in reading. Here we see our 8th grade MAP, RIT scores, and reading scores. So again, the orange on top there is what happened before the pandemic, and now we're starting to look at the class of 2024, right? The grad, they took their 8th grade MAP in 2020. So you're starting to see the pandemic effect. You'll see that that distribution changed in math. It went from 245.6 for the mean down to 241.5. That signals statistically a completely different distribution. So that's something we really, really need to pay attention to. And here we see the 2025 and the 2026. And you'll notice in the 2026, students who took the MAP in school year 2022, 21, 22, those are our current freshmen. You'll see there's a lot of yellow there in terms of their distribution. You'll see that, and that again means that we really need to pay attention to that cohort. African-American students, Hispanic Latino students, and white students have a different distribution of achievement coming in mathematics. And on the right-hand side, you see the reading, and reading, again, what do you notice? There's no yellow. So what does this mean? It means that we really have to focus on math. We have to partner with our provider district, both their 65 and our private parochial folks, to really look at sequentially what's going on and to really see what the, because incoming does not look great, right? We've looked at the incoming cohorts that were disrupted by the pandemic, and we see that that's going to have a long-term impact on math instruction at the high school. Gretchen.
Thank you very much for doing the statistical analysis, because I couldn't run that myself, despite my single college-level stats class. So two things here. Number one, what leaps out to me, in addition to this important point you make about the statistical significance of the variation in student performance in this band of years that include the pandemic, is that what's going unsaid in this report, I guess, is where our students in each of these subgroups stand on the broader scale of college readiness, or whatever you want to call the standard by which we should be aiming for. So what you haven't really addressed, and I think we would be remiss as a school to ignore, is the fact that there are still subgroups that fall short of that, of where they need to be, and that hasn't changed. And in particular, I mean, our white students are at, here you're in math, 251.6, math RIT score. I don't know what 251.6 means, but I do know that it's a higher number than 232 for our African-American/Black students. So you've given no context for that, for me. You probably have a better understanding. I completely appreciate the point you're making that, in this bandwidth, there's more change or less change or whatever, but we're not confronting that sort of critical fact.
I would agree. Right.
I'm not trying to, maybe this is, you never intended to, but it seems to me that's, as a school board, that's what I need to know.
Right. Let me bottom line
Alongside.
it. This math slide will have profound impact on our ability to make our benchmarks, period. Cross demographic. This tells me it's across demographics.
Yeah.
That's
And
what that
I'm
says.
taking that away. And I actually really appreciate your top line way of
yeah.
presenting this. That was very, helpful. But as I'm absorbing it, I'm just grappling with this point, that these numbers, you're making a statistical point and we're losing sight of kind of what the point of the statistical point is. And And that is that we want all of our students to be prepared in a way that doesn't perpetuate the racial predictability of their preparedness, right? And then secondly, so I don't know, I just want to think about that. I want to think about how you can get that information to the board.
We could do that.
Okay.
We could run that number.
And in a different kind of context or different
Oh,
report or,
Yeah, we could run the number. In fact, I could have the number run within the week.
yeah, that would be
I
great.
could run the number
Maybe
for
we could just
the,
have a little follow-up for.
Yeah, for the SAT, I could do it not the next board meeting, but the board meeting after that one, but I could also circulate it. What you're asking for, so that I'm understanding, is you want the distribution around the state cut scores.
Yeah,
what
some
you want.
sort of, whatever we think is the appropriate place to be looking. And the reason, this leads me to my second point, which is, the reason I'm asking that is that I was thinking about an appropriate metaphor here, and, the financial metaphor is the one that popped into my mind. We have reserves as a school district to help us out. There's a statutory requirement to keep those reserves, of course. But the point of having them is so that when we're hit with something unexpected, like this really old building of ours crumbling, we have money that can prop it back up. Or we get hit with a pandemic and we need to do some extra things with our students, we have it available. Our students don't have the reserves. We have not built up, except maybe in our white students, we haven't built up anything that we can afford to lose because of a pandemic. Our students of color, there's no wiggle room there. They're behind. They went in behind, and they're still behind, even more so because of the pandemic. So it just, I just don't want to lose sight of those differences. And that's why I'm asking for that further clarity about where everybody needs to be.
We'll run it. It won't be pretty. It'll look similar to what we have here, but we'll run it.
And we'll also tell you what it really means when you talk about that RIT score and the college readiness. We'll tell you what that really means.
Yeah, that will be interesting because, you started by saying the disparities are there. They continue to be there. So.
Yeah, even when, and to that point, even when you don't see, for the reading, you don't see a change, right, within subgroup, right? So Black achievement to Black achievement to Black achievement, white achievement to white achievement to white achievement, Latino. You don't see it across the pandemic in reading, but what you do see is the persistence of those gaps.
Exactly. Exactly.
That's evident in the data.
Right.
Yeah, that's right there.
Were you just going to unmute? Okay. So this is a hard piece for me because in some ways, of course, we have to do exactly what you just did, and we always ask for this, which is to disaggregate and to understand. And yet, in some ways, it pits our kids against each other. And I know we're not, that's not our goal. And I hear what you're saying, Gretchen. There's some realities around the way these tests measure where kids are, and yet there's something that also hurts to hear it said in a way that our kids are coming, our Black students are coming unable or not having, and I in that measurement, okay, but in a full reality, untrue. And so that slide that you have with the statement, I think it's the first one with what teachers, students have to do, I would like it to be amended. Let's see, I think it's that one. While we want to see an increase in academic performance on these instruments, we also want students, so here's where my problem is we're putting so much on our kids to reconnect with their classmates and teachers, even though I know you're framing it up in a incentivized, beautiful way, but I don't hear it way. So it falls on me in this way that, because we want them to do that and to remember how to engage in learning at school. And teachers, I love you all, as a teacher myself, but I wanted to read, we also want staff to learn how to reconnect with their students and their colleagues, to remember how to, or maybe it's to learn how to engage or re-engage in a new crew of kids who hatched at home, who really need us to figure out a new way. And so I just want the onus to be put on us a little
Sure.
bit more.
Sure.
I like that. And talking about what has happened. Not just putting it all on the students, but also naming the impact.
Right, because they learned so much, right?
Yeah.
Like and our kids are, are so rich and in awareness and knowledge, and our job is to, I'm preaching to the choir, but to help leverage that so that they can show up and be the brilliant people that they are. So, and I don't negate what you're saying also, Gretchen, in that, these tests are showing something that is troubling for our students. Anyway, okay.
Yeah, I think it sounds like you're talking a bit about the story that we're telling and that we're learning from the story, which how does it reflect our values and how are our values reflected in how we present the data. And I'm wondering, for me, and I don't know if I'm the only person here, I have trouble reading all those numbers. And I wonder if there's any way to, I'm not a statistical I don't know how to present, I'm not great with graphs, but I can read graphs in a certain way easier than I can reading all these blocks of numbers and sort of trying to connect RIT scores to, in the 8th grade and 2020 to 2022, and I feel like I'm trying to kind of I'm trying to follow, like, what class was that when they were in 8th grade and where are they, I'm just having a hard time sort of
Sure.
seeing a student demographic through their journey in relation to other student demographics and on that sort of timeline. So is there a way to create a line graph or some other kind of graphic that can maybe speak to some of what you want us to see here?
So what I want you to see is the yellow, which shows where we need to focus. I think we could do a graph. Or what I would probably do is just include those yellow groups just labeled. So I would say 2022 grad distribution down compared. Yeah. So that's what I would say. Possibly. The big story, though, I don't want to lose track of the big story, is that it's math. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
You can tell I'm on point with my line. But yeah, no, we could look at different ways to represent the data. I think it's important to see the tables, though, just to have a full layout for transparency, but we could put them into some sort of graph as we track. I think we should track this for years to come to be quite straightforward with everyone, because I don't think it's going to, I think it's going to change over time, and it'll be important to note those changes and inflections and based on our effort and what we do different to get to Mira's point, what our teachers do. Because it will require changing how we do things.
Right, and math doesn't have to be something that is so formalized or always as sequential as we've been conditioned to think it is. I mean, there are cultures and groups of people who learn and do math in many different ways around our world. And so I feel like this is a moment for math.
It is.
To become culturally responsive.
I like that. This is a moment for math. That resonates.
Pat?
Well, first I want to thank Mira for her comments, because you said what was kind of percolating, but you said it better than I would have. So I'm going to jump off of it, though, because I feel like, I think you're right. You do need to study these things. You do need this data. It also shows us that what we already knew before the pandemic and continues to now, which is we have gaps that are unacceptable and we have to do something about them. And I guess I feel like we've talked about this before, but as horrible as the pandemic has been and has challenged our students and our adults and just our world, it is a moment to say, blow it up. What are we doing wrong? What do we, or not even that, that's the negative way to say it, but what can we do differently that reaches kids, whether it's in math or reading? I mean, I appreciate what you said, Pete, that it hasn't changed, but it hasn't changed.
Right.
And we need it to change, right? So I guess, I don't know, I beat this drum a lot in terms of new leadership, and I think with the pandemic, we have this opportunity to say, what have we learned and what can we do differently? So part of the way this was framing up for me was, how does this how does this inform instruction? But it's more than that. I think Mira did a good job of saying that. But sort of how do we use information like this, and I know you have other information like this, to really step back and do things differently so that, yes, we address these problems, but we also address the ones we had in February of 2020 and we still have now. So that's kind of it's not really a question. I don't expect you to have an answer right this minute, but it's a I don't know what's the word I'm looking for. It's a request or a challenge, or what? An invitation. Thank you. See, Mira, maybe you can be,
Well, can I make it a question?
Yes, please.
Because my question is, what's the plan?
So one of the things we're doing for math is that we've brought the data science class really breaks the mold here. It breaks the mold, and I don't know, yeah, right? One of the things it does is it looks at local data. It takes local data, and kids are working with local data. They're doing statistical tests. They're also doing data visualization. They're identifying issues in their community. We're doing that right now. We have a group of kids who are, and it's deep. They just finished a unit on essentially like colorism, really. They did a data analysis of colorism from they would pick a magazine online, and then they have this tool that takes, that they look at the photos, and then they look at the skin color. 3 clicks on a face with the software, and then it puts it on a 3D graph. And then it allows you to visualize what is privileged, what isn't privileged within the magazine and all, and then they pull and they extrapolate the data based on their source. It's things like that are really deep. That's math that we didn't have. We didn't have access to that kind of math. We didn't have access to those kind of tools even 2 years ago. Yeah. We're currently working with the University of Chicago, State of Illinois, to try, and our folks in higher ed to try to get that to be a recognized course in terms of college career readiness. So traditionally, it's 2 algebra, it's pre-calculus, it's this very mundane march through mathematics to be an engineer, really, or pre-med. And that doesn't meet the needs of our kids. What we need are consumers of mathematics and creators with mathematics, and that's what those kind of courses do. So we started with 2 sections. I'm not going to tell you, but I'm going to tell you it's grown like 4-fold for next year, just based on requests. We went from 2 teachers, now we're going to have 3 teachers. Not just teacher class periods, but it's really going to require 3 teachers. So you're seeing a movement. Our students are voting with their feet. This high-level mathematics. That's the kind of thing we need to do. Because if we try to fit it in or carve a space out into algebra and do it differently that way, it's not going to happen. What we need is to completely innovate and be a visionary about it. About 6 years ago, we did STEAM Design Thinking and Innovation, STEAM DTI for seniors as a capstone experience. That course grew. exponentially as well. We have several sections of it running, and again, it's that integrated approach to mathematics. That's what we need to back map. Up against us is the state, right? The state says, no, you take algebra, you take geometry, you take pre-calc, you take all. We're moving away from that as a district, and we're leading the way with that. We were responsible for the state getting a code, a state code in mathematics for data science. We met with the state and we lobbied that. That's the kind of stuff it's going to take, that kind of creative thinking to really move it, because then what we're doing is we're giving kids a what's in it for me. We're letting them see themselves in a math curriculum. We're really pushing that piece. It's groundbreaking, particularly in mathematics, to do that. I mean,
Challenging.
Yeah. And also
it's
to your point about plan, Monique, Dr. Brown is here. Dr. Brown, do you want to come and speak to our efforts around reading and what you're planning with around, since you're here?
Since you're here, Dr. Brown.
There's a mic
Well,
for
and
you.
because I was thinking exactly what Pat said, and I'm basic, so I was just like, because I know that we are. That's what I said.
I know, right?
I'm not basic.
Not
Because
like,
we
you know.
report this.
Right.
And it's just like, here we go, and we hear the gap persists, and, Black students are not performing like our white students, and so we hear that, but, I know that there's stuff behind trying to get at this. And so, I think it's good for us to know this. Of course, we need to know that, but we need to know this. Like, this is powerful. This is, the work. This is what we're trying to do to get at that. And I want to know that. Of course I do,
But you do know this.
I do. I know
You
it's
already know
persistent.
this.
I
Yeah.
know it is. I know it is. I know what's coming
Yeah.
from 6th, 7th, and 8th grade.
Yeah.
And I don't want to look at all the numbers again. I'm like, there was Stephanie, we know. It's less than it was, and so it's like, because, we're school board members, so we don't get deep into we just see that it's still dropping. And the issue is, what are we doing? Because it's still dropping.
And before Kiwana speaks, Mary, your comment made me think of the way we begin to disaggregate data by race, and how even No Child Left Behind was a form of whiteness as policy, because it doesn't problematize why the data is the way that it is.
That's right.
And I think as a district, we've come a long way to begin to continue to problematize the data, to really understand why does it exist the way that it exists, and we struggle with why does it persist the way that it persists, and that's exactly the space that we need to be in for transformation. So, and to be more innovative and forward-thinking about the kinds of courses that we offer, and the kinds of literacy interventions that we are beginning to put in place school-wide. So I literally had to pull up the article to even make me think about it. But Dr. Brown, you want to really speak to that piece? Because what we're doing as an institution is exactly what we should be doing. But what we're still faced with this idea is that it still persists, and we're needing to problematize that a little bit more and really get to some solutions and strategies.
There's that word again.
So yeah, we're definitely trying to work towards some creative solutions to close a lot of the gaps that we're seeing. And what Dr. Davis was just speaking to was the disciplinary literacy of mathematics, right? Like, we're putting students into the place where they have to be mathematicians, and they have to be creative, and they have to use projects in order to understand the content. And that's a lot of what we're doing in not just math, but in science and in English and in reading and in history, and just trying to make it real life for students, because they really can't conceptualize the broader things. Like, when we talk about things in context of has been, they don't get it. So we need to make it very personal for them and make sure that they're really understanding why it applies to them. And that's kind of our focus, especially with the way that we're looking at our interventions. It's making things very real life and trying to contextualize it so that students really understand why it matters to them. We're trying to make education matter again, and that's the biggest thing, especially with cell phones and all these other things. That's much more engaging for students. We're trying to bring it back to like, why is being in ETHS, why is being in this building, why is being in high school relevant for me? One of the ways that we're also doing that is with our instructional coaching model, just looking at how we're bringing that to all of our teachers in the classroom and making that a valid resource to help teachers understand how they can bring instruction to students in a way that's deliverable, in a way that's relevant, in a way that builds upon the social emotional learning. So just trying to bring all those things together so that we're supporting our students where they are, but also allowing them to be able to grow at the same time. And like I said, that's part of the disciplinary literacy of math that Pete was talking about, but that's also something that we're trying to work on building for students in all content areas.
So what you're saying basically is that you're looking at the whole student. You're not just looking at a piece or a subject. You're looking at the whole student and taking into consideration their life experience, their history, and not only what they've been through for the past 2 years, but what they face when they leave here and what's ahead for them for the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think especially in this time and age, we really want to make sure that students want to be here. There are so many other things that they have that are distractions for them in their lives.
Sure.
Why is it important for you to come to ETHS? Why is it important for you to get up and come to this building every single day? And that's really the thing that we want to reinforce when we build our curriculum for students now.
And Dr. Bavis, when you talk about those creative, innovative ways that we are able to do and teach math, that's really powerful because we have to make math relevant for students. If we don't, they're not gonna engage.
Right, and when we talk about making math relevant for students in the context of those classes, it's not like we're saying, like, let's do a word problem.
Yeah.
We're saying, let's do a community problem. What are some challenges in the community? What do we need to look at, data, analyze, collect?
Yeah.
And what do we need to synthesize, analyze, and then do data visualization behind it? It's the complete thing. And it requires a different mindset, requires a shift in instruction, and a willingness to allow kids to explore, right? And to, in some cases, fail forward, right? It's not like you're failing a test, it's like you fail to iterate, right? Try out, do over, improve, which is more realistic and more aligned to how math and all those things function and engineering and all that stuff functions in the real world. Very seldom do you get it right the first time.
So to be clear, this is the literacy work in response to the data.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
And numeracy work in
Yeah.
response to the data.
Yeah.
It's a literacy and
right.
numeracy report.
Literacy and numeracy.
It's a space to innovate in.
But of course, we're going to be more aggressive and lift up because we know that if the data were switched and white students were performing this way, our community they would be a different response. So we need to be just as intentional that this is unacceptable for any student.
Any student. And the white scores are going down. They're yellow on that board. So maybe that does force a different conversation too.
Yeah. Yes.
That's right.
That's right. Ooh, be careful. CRT. All right, yes. This is the work. This is the work that we have ahead of us.
This is the work in it.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not easy, of course. But this is it. This is why we're here.
Yep.
Okay, other questions, board? Are we ready?
You're welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you for coming, Dr. Brown.
I was going to say, Dr. Brown's never going to show up at a.
Yeah, right. You show up and sit in the back. There's no hiding. Yeah. Right. That's my agenda. Okay, moving right along. Oh, the next item is district goals discussion. So I don't have a whole lot to share. Dr. Campbell and I are meeting with the representative from the Alma Group next week. Is that right?
Yes.
Next week. So we'll have more. The 9th. Oh, that's this week. That's in a couple of days. Okay, hopefully it's in my calendar. It's in my calendar, Lisa, don't worry. So, yeah, so we'll definitely have something for the next board meeting. But the one thing I did want to say, which is not totally related, is that we had a retreat, self-evaluation on Saturday, last Saturday, the 28th? Yes, the 28th. And we'll be talking some more about the information that came out of that. But one of the things that we decided to do as a board, and I already feel this tonight, is that we decided to really participate and speak our truth. And when we're in board meetings, to really have a meeting, to really kind of say what's on our mind, talk to each other, and just be more forthright in what we hear presented to us and what questions we have. We frame it a little bit differently, and I'm feeling that tonight. I think I don't know about all of you, but I'm certainly feeling like this is something that we have taken to heart, and I feel really good about the last few discussions we've had so far. So I just want to name that because I think it will improve our time together. It will improve our meetings, and they'll be more authentic, and the conversations and discussions and the questions will really take us to a place where we want to go. We may not always come to a resolution, but at least I feel like we are engaging more. So, thank you. All right. Next item is comments from the public. Dr. Davis, do we have comments from the public?
We have no comments from the public this evening.
Okay. All right. The next item is FOIA.
Yes, we have two FOIAs, one from Scody and one from Dustin, and the response in your packet.
Okay, thank you. All right, the next item is board committee reports, and we have a couple of reports that were submitted. We have the joint District 65-202 committee meeting that was held on the 19th of January, right? And then we have the city school liaison committee that was held on the 24th of January. So those reports are
I just
in
had one
the
question.
packet. Yeah.
So, thank you for putting those reports in the packet, for whoever prepared those, I can't remember. I just had one question on the joint 65-202 committee meeting notes. It said that, I wasn't sure who prepared them. It said that the agenda was set for our meeting, but the agenda items were set for the meeting, but didn't say what the agenda items were. So I was just curious. Anybody who's at that meeting, I guess Pat and somebody else, Marcus, I guess.
Yeah, I was
And I
there.
felt like somebody else. Yeah, what's on the agenda?
What is on the agenda? Make sure I remember this. We are talking
I don't mean to put you on the
No,
spot.
no.
It was sort of a mystery when I
Yes,
read
we're
it.
talking about literacy. We're talking about AVID.
NU partnerships.
And the Northwestern University NARA partnership, NU and
Yes.
NARA partnership. Thank you. That's on the
Okay, so, I'm sorry, say again.
literacy.
So are we not
update.
going to talk about numeracy with District 65?
Well, I think
Given your highlight of that tonight?
Maybe now, in light of the data, we need to update that.
I don't know, maybe you
I think
could.
that would be a really good idea.
Okay.
Of course.
Yeah, I kind of think that, to be completely transparent, I think that we talked about these items for the agenda as being sort of overarching items.
Sure.
So we would definitely include this data.
And then NERA,
NERA,
which is work related to this.
Yes.
And then, what was the last one?
AVID, college readiness.
AVID, yeah, okay, right.
Right.
Because AVID is new in 65.
AVID is
is.
new in District 65,
Newer.
and we're creating a vertical alignment between the districts.
Yahoo, we've only been talking about that
for
for
years.
years. Okay,
Yeah,
great.
and that meeting is in a couple of weeks.
Yeah,
Yep,
thank you for clarifying that.
yep. All right. Okay. So any other questions? So there was another committee, the audit committee, but we're going to talk about that when we actually do the audit, so didn't write that up. Okay, student board report. Nicole.
All right. Hello, everyone. It's been quite a meaty meeting today. A lot of content.
There you go.
Well, speaking of like the AP African American Studies, course selection is over, and a lot of stress has about decision making. Speaking personally, and what I've seen has been lifted off of our shoulders. As we are approaching spring, a lot of the summits are coming soon. So this week we have the Black Student Summit, which is on Wednesday and Thursday, and then the MENA Summit, which is Middle Eastern, North African, Asian Summit, is on March 1st. The LGBTQIA+ is on March 30th, and the Latinx Student Summit is on April 19th. So it's a lot of things to look forward to, a lot of community and solidarity to look forward to. Moving on to the Student Union, we are currently making a presentation, and when I say we, it's like the core leadership team. So me and like 8 other students, we're working on making a presentation of the student feedback from way back in December, the Student Voice Forum for our meeting with Dr. Kinsey, Dr. Campbell, and their leadership team on February 13th at 9 a.m. We hope to use this time to ask questions, have them ask us questions, and then also share with them what they should expect as the student union begins to form committees around the topics that we talked about in the Student Voice Forum, and begin writing proposals for the upcoming school years and in the future, I guess. The committees we have started to form in recent student union meetings will begin to hopefully meet with the administration throughout the spring and begin to make some great changes. And that concludes my little report.
Wonderful, thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, Dr. Campbell.
Yeah, thank you. It's an important report, Nicole.
Yes, it is.
Okay, all right. So as part of my listening and learning series, I hosted a community talk back at St. Nicholas's Church here in Evanston. It was held in Spanish, and I want to thank everyone for joining me, Dr. Kinsey and so many others that night. I can say that I was truly moving around the compass in that conversation. Mm-hmm. And there are going to be some things that we look into as we seek to build more bridges in partnership with our Latinx community here in Evanston. And so there's more to come about that, which is why we do these. My administration continues to hold talking circles for staff. The latest one was hosted by Dr. Kinsey just last week. These monthly conversations provide an opportunity to share viewpoints and ideas on what is working and how we can all grow together. It's also an opportunity to just process and just talk and to be in community, to be in solidarity. We started the year out talking about solidarity, and this is one of the ways we model and be in solidarity, is to be in fellowship and community one with another. So Dr. Kinsey's been leading that effort, and thank you, and we appreciate your work, Taya. Spring conferences are a little more than 2 weeks away. Can't believe that. They will be held remotely on Thursday, February 23rd from 1:30 to 4:30 and from 6 to 9 p.m. As a reminder, Thursday, February 23rd will be a non-attendance day for students. Be sure to check your email and the website to see when conference signups begin. And ETHS is currently celebrating Black History Month. Throughout the month of February. Today we kicked off like a spirit week. It was Rep Your Culture, so I'm repping a little bit of, culture here. And the Black Student Summit, as Nicole mentioned, is this week, which is organized, planned, run and implemented by students here at ETHS. The adults just do the facilitation, but the kids come up with pretty much everything. And I've sent the board, you have a template for what those days are going to look like. And anyone who wants to see what we do in these summits, just go to our website. The social consciousness page will highlight past and present events, and we're excited. We're the only high school that I know in the country that's doing work like that, and I'm proud of it.
Yeah.
So that concludes my report.
Thank you. All right. All right. And this is more like Kendra's hour. We wanted her to feel at home, so we decided to just draw it out.
All is right with the world. All righty, everyone, I'm back again. So, two presentations, one from the Audit Committee, one from the Finance Committee that we'll go through. The first of which is the review for our annual comprehensive financial report. So that's our audit report that we were able to present with the Audit Committee. Met on January 31st, 2023. So that was last week that we were able to meet and go in depth, or as in depth as you can go on a document that's 170 pages. We were able to, discuss that and kind of thoroughly review that with the auditors. And so we had that discussion. Highlights of the financials were brought up and other important information. And the big piece, the big takeaway is that we had an unmodified audit opinion. So that's positive and exciting. And so, yeah, just the big piece to rejoice. I hold my breath for that. And so with any audit, they are always able to provide us with feedback on things that we can work on, correct, so that we can have an even better audit the following year. And so some things that just came up are improvements that can be made to our capital asset tracking processes, and then also coding of federal and state receipts in the general ledger. And so some of the things to speak on: there weren't any significant deficiencies or material weaknesses found, nothing of that nature. But with these, like as an example, we may have different title grants or federal grants where we receive funds in, and so all the revenue was received, all of the revenue was deposited and tracked, but they did note that, like, for example, if we received ESSER funds in round 1 and round 2, perhaps we put something that belonged to round 2 and round 1, and so they just noted that we should be more careful about making sure that those go in the appropriate accounts so that we're tracking everything correctly in our general ledger. And so, like I said, just points for feedback that they give. We make the corrections and just, strive to do better the following year. And then another item that impacted our financial statements would be GASB statement number 87 that was issued. So in the application of that, it has to do with leases, and that we had to recognize, if you're as a lessee, you have to recognize a lease liability, or as a lessor to recognize the lease receivable. And so it just affects the balance sheet that we have. And so just bringing that up as an adjustment to our financial statements. So some more good news. We did really well financially in this past fiscal year. Total revenues were $119.7 million and expenses of $111.6. So that was increased our net position by $8 million. And that was really in a large part due to our corporate personal property replacement tax that we received. We had it budgeted at about $2 million, which would have been consistent with previous years, but then ended up getting a significant amount more. We got over $6 million for that. And so it really came as a big surprise when the money started rolling in, not only for us, but for other districts in the area as well. Incredibly grateful considering all the challenges and needs that we had last year coming back from the pandemic. And so it was nice to be able to have some additional funds to address some of those needs, but it did lead to us having a surplus. And then also the fund balance in the general fund. The general fund includes the Ed Fund, Tort Fund, and working cash. And so for that, we increased the fund balance by $2.9 million. And in a large part, that was also due to some federal aid revenues. We know that we had ESSER funds that came in and some other grants that became available, whether it be related to COVID or mental health grants, things of that nature. So that also allowed for us to have a surplus. And so kind of drilling into the debt service fund in particular, our long-term debt was reduced by almost $2.8 million. And so, you know, we work diligently to pay down our debt and adhere to our debt schedules and make sure that we're staying on top of those. And so when it comes to debt, you know, we issue debt to really care for our capital needs, because we have capital needs that outpace the available funds that we have. We can hardly keep up with it, even with the issuance of debt. And so we're always trying to look for ways to support those capital needs, and hence why we issue debt every other year. And so in 2022, in addition to that, we also transferred $900,000 from the educational fund to the capital fund in order to further support those needs, because we know that there's just not enough to cover the needs of this very large building. I was going to talk some on depreciation, but I can't remember. That point comes in the next presentation. And so capital fund highlights. So the capital fund balance increased by $2.4 million, but I just want to provide some context for that. As I mentioned, we issue debt every other year. And so what ends up happening is that in 1 year, we may issue debt for $5.5 million or $6 million, but that really has to serve for 2 years until we issue debt again. And so 1 year it looks like, oh, the capital fund is doing really well, and then the next year it's at zero. So I just want to throw that out there, you know, when we're saying, oh, we have all of these capital needs, and then we have a $2.4 million fund balance increase. It is intentional so that we can reserve some money in order to handle whatever we have planned for the following summer. And so, speaking of projects for the following summer, and then even what we were able to accomplish in fiscal year 2022. So for FY 2022, the projects that were completed were the literacy lab, auditorium upgrades, band tower, and then of course there's always like some tuck pointing and some other projects that happen as well. And then for summer of 2022, so these would be the projects that got completed for FY 23. So a year from now, we'll be talking about, you know, that these were completed, but the nurse's office renovation happened, girls' locker room, and then also our window replacement project that spanned 2 years. And just some factors bearing on the district's future to highlight. You know, the state of the economy right now is, it's an interesting place, and especially as it relates to the state, because the state can never really get a good grasp on how to handle their finances. We know we always have to be concerned about what that will mean for us. Will that impact, you know, the general state aid that we get, our evidence-based funding, or some of the categorical aid that we receive? Because any shift could, you know, impact us a great deal. And so we have to be prepared for that. And then also, you know, there's been talk for years about the cost of the TRS pension system being passed on to the districts to cover. And so if that were to happen, that also would have a serious impact on our finances. And then employment contracts. So we know that we were able to successfully negotiate 4 employment contracts last year, and then we're going to be negotiating 2 this year, but always just keeping in mind, especially knowing that salaries are the biggest piece of our expenditures. And so when we have these employment contracts and you have an economy that, you know, is doing well now, but we know that there's talks of a recession, what does that mean for what we've already committed to, and making sure that we're in a good position to ride that wave no matter what happens. All right, any questions or comments? No? Are you guys eager for the next one? Is that it? I did bring all of the 170 odd pages in case anybody wanted to, no, no. I will get up the next presentation in just a moment. Okay, so here we have our, did I open the right one? Yes, our mid-year budget review. So this is the time that we typically come to the board and talk about how we were doing as of the end of December, right, which is that mid-year point in our fiscal year. So it covers from July through December. So just keep that in mind, that even though we're in February right now, we're talking about July through December, because it does, like, in order for us to report, we have to get everything booked and everything and ready and prepared to discuss. And so I just want to be clear on what time period we're talking about, because it's going to affect the discussion that we'll be having this evening. So before I get into the graph, actually, I just want to qualify some things. So you all know that unfortunately, Cook County was quite delayed in us receiving our tax revenue. We didn't receive it until late December. Unfortunately, mid to late December is when everything started to roll in. So as a result, when we're looking at our revenues this evening through the end of December, things are going to look skewed, because the majority of the taxes that we would receive in August typically, we started getting in December, and then we got the majority of it in January. So since December 31st.
Say that one more time, Kendra. We normally get it in August.
We normally get it in August. We did not start receiving that money until the latter half of December. And so thank you. It is really something to pause on, because that was a stressful moment for me. And you know, right? And thankfully, because we have the reserves that were mentioned earlier this evening, we were able to make it until we received the property taxes coming in, thankfully. But it's a fortunate position, right? Because some people were there are districts that didn't have that. And so if you don't, then that means that the money's going to come at a cost, right? Like if we had to borrow money, that would be a cost to the district, even though it was no fault of our own. And so just something to keep in mind and be thankful for, that we have put ourselves in a strong financial position, and that why we always want to make sure that we budget conservatively, that we adhere to the budget, and that we stay on track, because you never know when something like this could happen again. So into the graphs. So when we're looking at this, right? So when we're looking at this, and as you can see, you know, we're nowhere near 50% on the revenues, because we're heavily reliant on property taxes. And so with that, when we're looking through all of these, you're going to see that the revenues are not where they would typically be in any other fiscal year. But the expenditures are all within range, right? Because everybody wants their money, whether we're getting ours or not. And so still have to pay bills. And so, you know, we experienced that expenditures were in that 45 to 55% range as expected, but the revenues for the education fund, as large as it is, you know, we weren't anywhere near what the typical range would be. And then for the tort fund, the expenditures were 100%. That's typical because we pay all of that in the beginning of the year. But then again, revenues at little over 25%. Over 25%. And then here for operations and maintenance, I mean, it's the same sad story, unfortunately, right? Like we just weren't getting the revenue in, and still having to continue to expend. And so for bond and interest, I'll point out that in this fund in particular, why you're seeing the majority of the expenditures happen already would be because on December 1st, that's when we have our debt payments due for principal and interest. And so the only thing left is that in the spring, we'll do some additional interest payments. But this is also to be expected for this particular fund. We always expend the majority of the money in end of November, beginning of December, and then the final interest payments will be paid in April. Transportation fund as well, less on the revenues, but on target as far as expenditures were concerned. same story here for the IMRF and Social Security Fund. I actually will say that expenditures are doing a little bit better than usual in this fund in particular, and that's mostly because IMRF is so well-funded that we have seen a decrease in the district portion that has to be paid for IMRF, so that's, worked in our favor. And then for the Capital Improvement Fund, revenue in this fund is mainly due to donations secured through the ETHS Foundation, and then, of course, the debt that I mentioned that we'll issue every other year. And expenditures are on target, and expenses were, used to primarily finish off the 2022 projects. So usually the majority of this fund is spent during the summer months, where we really gear up and do as many projects as we can handle, given the finances. And then we'll have another summer slam, as we call it. I was going to say next year, but no, that's in a few months. And so budget concerns. So we were able to, in the last presentation, touch on a couple of these. One that I'll highlight that wasn't on the last presentation would be the tax cap limit that we have. So we know that for our property taxes, we're limited to the lesser of 5% or CPI. And so last year, we were limited to 5% because CPI exceeded that 5%. And we'll be likely in the same situation again this year. And so it's worth mentioning, because when you're hearing crazy numbers about inflation, inflation's 8%, 9%, 6.5% for the year, what we have felt as a district is that the dollar is not going nearly as far as it used to. I mean, even for, let's say, take roofing, for example, we put some feelers out there with the architect about what it would cost. We spoke to the manufacturer. We did all of our due diligence to get a good pulse on how much it would cost to replace roofs. And then within months, we saw that price escalated by well over 15%. And so to see just how wild inflation is running, even though 5% sounds like a big number, like, increasing by 5%, that's unprecedented that we would have that happen 2 years in a row. But so are the costs, right? The costs are outpacing that. And so it's just something to keep in mind, that it's a challenge that we'll be facing, that transportation costs would be another example. When we're hearing about bus driver shortages and all of those things, that affects how much we have to pay for transportation, because as these bus companies are having to find creative and more expensive ways to retain drivers, we also are having to take part in that that cost. And so just different factors to keep in mind, that although 5% may sound like a bit to have year over year, if that's what we end up passing, we are still faced with the challenge of that limit. Opportunity for questions or comments.
Wow, thank you. Questions, board members?
I have a quick question.
Yes.
So, thank you for all of this, both the audit and the mid-year budget. So I guess my question is, with the state being behind, and then what you were saying about inflation and the costs, is there anything we should be thinking about or being ready for come the new budget and that transition to the new year over the summer? I mean, is it going to, I don't even know exactly what to ask about it, but it seems like we may not be caught up this year in terms of the state. I don't know, maybe they won't have given us our yearly allotment by July 1. So is there anything we should know or we should be thinking about or be prepared for as we enter into the next budget cycle?
So thank you for the concern. It always feels good to know that, everybody has the interest of the district and making sure that we're as financially prudent as we can possibly be. So thank you for that. At this point, like right here today, we're in a good position, for this fiscal year, but also just making sure that we're not necessarily that we're making the right decisions now so that we are secure for our future, right? And so some decisions have to be made sometimes where we may have to pivot. And so I brought up the roofs. When we went out to bid, we bid roofs, we bid windows as an alternate, and we thought that we were going to be able to do some great things. And then it turned out, okay, well, we can't do everything now. Because the price is so high, we're going to have to split this up, right? We have to make decisions when we start having certain things come in and the expenses coming up. We have to think creatively about, okay, so what does this mean based on the limits, right? We have a finite amount of money. Like, I'm still trying to figure out how to plant a money tree, but hasn't happened other than the little plants in my office. So, so you know, we're constantly keeping that at the top of our mind, right? It's one of the district goals, and one thing that I'm very fortunate about here is that everybody understands that it's a district goal. It's not just my goal. It's not just my job, and we all have to make sure that we're holding each other accountable for that. And so, just making sure that we keep that at the center, you know, when we're trying to make decisions that involve the finances.
Thank you.
And Kendra, I just want to say you've done a great job at weathering that storm this fall, because nobody knew, but you were on it and making the necessary, would have been making some necessary decisions that we were planning for had we come to that. So, but thank you for that, because that's just not an easy thing to do.
Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate that as well. That could have really been quite a disaster. So you really, I just really want to say how much I appreciate the foresight. Really, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right. So we are at the action items, and the first item is approval of the Women in History Month resolution, and I think Gretchen's going to read that for us.
Yes, I will. First, you know what, I have to make a brief editorial comment, because when I saw the title of our resolution, the theme for the month is celebrating women who tell our stories. I just wanted to say, I just happened to watch the movie the other day of the book called She Said, co-authored by Megan Twohey, ETHS graduate, who spoke at our high school graduation a few years ago, pre-pandemic, I guess. And for those of you who haven't seen the movie, and I know many of you have, she's actually, the actress who plays her in the movie is wearing the dress that Megan wore, or, you know, something that looks exactly like it, at our ETHS graduation. So anyway, I just, it's called She Said. It's the book about Herbie, you know, I'm not even going to say his name, that guy.
That's right.
Did you see the shirt that the jogger
Yes,
was wearing?
ETHS, yes, she was wearing an ETHS shirt, her Evanston shirt. There was an Illinois poster, I think, in her apartment. There was just a lot of, it was terrific. It's actually free on Peacock streaming. So there you go. I waited long enough. Anyway, it connects with the resolution, as you're going to see, okay? Women's History Month, March 2023. National Women's History Alliance theme for 2023, celebrating women who tell our stories. The 2023 Women's History theme, Celebrating Women Who Tell Our Stories, encourages the recognition of women, past and present, who have been active in all forms of media and storytelling, including print, radio, TV, stage, screen, blogs, podcasts, and more. The timely theme honors women in every community who have devoted their lives and talents to producing art, pursuing truth, and reflecting the human condition decade after decade. From the earliest storytellers through pioneering journalists, our experiences have been captured by a wide variety of artists and teachers. These include authors, songwriters, scholars, playwrights, performers, and grandmothers throughout time. Women have long been instrumental in passing on our heritage in word and in print to communicate the lessons of those who came before us. Women's stories and the larger human story expand our understanding and strengthen our connections with each other. The National Women's History Alliance recognizes and honors these brave, accomplished, and influential women who told and continue to tell our stories. Today and over the years ahead, their dedication and shared desire to give voice to the voiceless are critical to keeping us informed, entertained, and aware. The President of the United States has proclaimed March 2023 as Women's History Month to celebrate with appropriate programs, ceremonies, and activities that honor the history, accomplishments, and contributions of American women. Therefore, we, the District 202 School Board, do hereby proclaim the month of March 2023 as Women's History Month at Evanston Township High School.
Thank you. Can I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second?
Roll call, please.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
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 Yes, thank you. The next item is acceptance of fiscal year 2022 audit report that we just heard. Motion to accept?
So moved?
Second.
Roll call, please.
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
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 Yes. The next item is approval of intergovernmental agreement for the North Suburban Educational Region for Vocational Education, or INSERV. Could I have a motion for approval?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Yes?
Yes.
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 Yes. Next item is approval of press policy issue number 110, which we looked at last month. Could I have a motion for approval, please?
So moved.
Second?
Roll call, please.
Yes.
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 Yes?
Yes. Next item is the consent agenda, which consists of approval of minutes from the regular and closed session meetings from January 17th, 2023, and special and closed session meeting from January 28th, 2023. Approval of bills and the personnel report. Could I have a motion, please?
So moved?
Second.
Roll call, please.
Yes.
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 Yes?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, next item is old and new business. Is there any old or new business? I think we just talked a little bit earlier about the retreat. We'll talk some more about that later. Polling of the board, anything? I'm going to the Jazz Fest next week. Yay. I'm going to also see, what is it, Chicken and Biscuits. And the reason I am looked into that play is because I love the title. It's
It
like,
makes me hungry every
I
time I see
know,
the email.
right? So I'm looking for, I'll tell you about it. Okay, could I have a motion for adjournment?
I move we adjourn.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, the meeting is adjourned.